I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down my white dress for what felt like the 100th time. In just 3 days, I'd be walking down the aisle to marry Jack, my boyfriend of 5 years and partner at our law firm. Everything was perfect, or so I thought. "Emily, have you seen my cufflinks?" Jack called from the bedroom. "Check the dresser drawer," I replied, my mind elsewhere as I mentally ran through our wedding checklist. I walked into our shared office, ready to review the seating chart one last time. As I reached for the folder on Jack's desk, a pale blue envelope caught my eye. It was tucked beneath a stack of papers, partially hidden from view. My name isn't usually Emily Curious, but something about that envelope pulled at me. Before I could stop myself, I slid it out and turned it over in my hands. The handwriting was unfamiliar, addressed simply to Jack. I knew I shouldn't open it, but a nagging feeling in my gut told me this was important. With trembling fingers, I eased the letter out of the envelope. As I unfolded it, my eyes widened and my heart began to race. "Dear Jack," it began. "I hope this letter finds you well. I know we agreed not to contact each other, but I felt you should know that Tommy started kindergarten last week. He's growing up so fast and he looks more like you every day. I understand your reasons for staying away, but I thought you'd want to know how your son is doing." The letter slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the floor. Jack had a son. My mind reeled as I tried to make sense of what I'd just read. How could he keep this from me? We'd been together for 5 years, and not once had he mentioned having a child. "Am you okay in there?" Jack's voice snapped me back to reality. I quickly shoved the letter back into the envelope and tucked it where I'd found it. "Just double-checking the seating chart," I called back, my voice shakier than I'd intended. As I walked out of the office, my legs felt like jelly. I plastered on a smile as I faced Jack, but inside I was screaming. How could I marry a man who'd hidden such a massive secret from me? The next few days passed in a blur. I went through the motions of last-minute wedding preparations, all while grappling with the knowledge of Jack's hidden child. Every time he smiled at me or touched my hand, I felt a pang of betrayal. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but fear held me back. What if this ruined everything? Not just our relationship, but our careers too. We were partners at the firm, and a scandal like this could destroy everything we'd worked for. As the wedding day drew closer, the weight of the secret grew heavier. I barely slept, tossing and turning as scenarios played out in my mind. Should I call off the wedding? Confront Jack? Pretend I never saw the letter? Each option seemed worse than the last. The morning of the wedding arrived, and I found myself sitting in front of a mirror once again, this time surrounded by my bridesmaids as they fussed over my hair and makeup. I stared at my reflection, hardly recognizing the woman looking back at me. "Emily, you look beautiful, my best friend and maid of honor," Sarah said as she adjusted my veil. But then she frowned, catching my eye in the mirror. "Are you okay? You seem off." I opened my mouth to assure her I was fine, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, to my horror, I burst into tears. "Oh, honey," Sarah said, quickly shooing the other bridesmaids out of the room. She knelt beside me, taking my hands in hers. "What's wrong? And don't you dare say it's just wedding jitters." I looked at my best friend, the woman who'd been by my side through thick and thin, and suddenly the whole story came pouring out: the letter. Jack's son, my fears and doubts, all of it. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression growing more concerned with each word. When I finished, she squeezed my hands tightly. "Emily," she said, her voice low and serious, "you can't marry him without talking about this first." I shook my head, panic rising in my chest. "But the guests are already here. Everything's ready. I can't just." "You can and you will." Sarah cut me off firmly. "A marriage can't start with lies, Em. You need to confront Jack before you walk down that aisle." I stared at her, knowing she was right, but terrified of what might happen. I began, but Sarah interrupted me again. "No what ifs. You're one of the toughest lawyers I know, Emily. You can handle this now. Do you want me to get Jack, or are you going to do it yourself?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "I'll do it," I said, standing up. Can you tell him to meet me in the side room? And Sarah, thank you. She smiled, giving me a quick hug. That's what I'm here for. Now go get your answers. As I walked towards the side room, my heart pounded so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. I pushed open the door, my hands shaking to find Jack already waiting inside. Emily, what's going on? Sarah said you needed to talk to me urgently, he said. His brow furrowed with concern. I took a deep breath, gathering all my courage. Jack, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Jack's expression shifted from concern to confusion. Course, you can ask me anything. What's this about? I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself. When I opened them, I looked directly into Jack's eyes and said, Do you have a son? The color drained from Jack's face. He stumbled backward, grasping the edge of a nearby table for support. His reaction told me everything I needed to know before he even spoke. How did you find out? He stammered, his voice barely audible. I found a letter, I replied, my own voice surprisingly steady. Jack, why didn't you tell me? We've been together for 5 years. We're about to get married. How could you keep something like this from me? Jack sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed. Emily, I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you so many times. But I was afraid. Afraid of what? I demanded, anger starting to bubble up beneath my shock. Of losing you, he said softly. Of reliving the pain. Emily, there's something you need to know. My son, Tommy, he passed away 2 years ago. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. What? Jack's voice cracked as he continued. He had a rare genetic disorder. We found out when he was 3. The doctors tried everything, but he trailed off, tears streaming down his face. I sank into the chair opposite him, my mind reeling. Jack, I'm so sorry, but why didn't you tell me? I could have been there for you. He shook his head. It was before we got serious. By the time we were talking about a future together, it just felt easier to keep it buried. I didn't want to bring that pain into our relationship. I thought I could leave it in the past. I reached out and took his hand, my anger melting into a confused mix of sympathy and hurt. Jack, you should have told me. Relationships are about sharing everything, the good and the bad. I would have understood. I know that now, he said, squeezing my hand. I was wrong to keep it from you. Can you forgive me? I looked into his eyes, seeing the pain and regret there. Despite the shock and hurt, I knew I loved this man. Yes, I said softly, but Jack, no more secrets. Promise me. He nodded solemnly. Promise, Emily, no more secrets. We sat in silence for a moment, both processing the weight of what had just happened. Finally, I stood up, smoothing down my dress. We should get back. Everyone's waiting. Jack stood too, pulling me into a tight embrace. I love you, Emily. More than anything, I love you too, I whispered back. As we walked back to rejoin our wedding party, I felt a mix of emotions, relief that the truth was out, sadness for Jack's loss, and a renewed commitment to our relationship. We had weathered this storm together, and I believed we could face anything. The ceremony was beautiful, more meaningful now that we had shared this deep truth. As we exchanged vows, I saw a new depth in Jack's eyes, a vulnerability that made me love him even more. The reception was in full swing, laughter and music filling the air. I was chatting with some college friends when I noticed Jack step away. His phone pressed to his ear. Something about his posture made me uneasy. I excused myself and discreetly followed him out of the ballroom. I found him in a quiet hallway. His back to me as he spoke in hushed tones. No. Look, I can't talk now. I'll figure something out, okay? Just give me some time. As he ended the call, I cleared my throat. Jack spun around, his eyes wide with surprise. Emily, Who was that? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Just work stuff, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Nothing to worry about. I felt a chill run down my spine. Hadn't we just promised no more secrets? Jack, please don't lie to me. Not today of all days. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a commotion from outside caught our attention. Through the window, I saw a car pull up, and a woman got out, holding the hand of a small boy. My heart stopped. It couldn't be. Without thinking, I rushed outside, Jack calling after me. As I burst through the doors, the woman turned, startled. And there, holding her hand, was a little boy who looked exactly like Jack. "Emily, wait," Jack shouted, catching up to me. But it was too late. I had seen the truth with my own eyes. I turned to him, my world crumbling around me. "You lied to me," I whispered again. The woman looked between us, realization dawning on her face. "Oh God," she said. "You must be Emily." "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. Jack said he'd told you everything." I laughed bitterly. Clearly he didn't. Jack stepped forward, his face a mask of panic. "Emily, please, I can explain." But I cut him off, my voice ice cold. "Explain what, Jack? How you lied about your son being dead. How you've been hiding him all this time. How you stood there in that room and promised me no more secrets." The little boy looked up at me, his eyes, Jack's eyes, wide with confusion. "Daddy," he said softly, and my heart shattered all over again. I turned to the woman who looked as shell-shocked as I felt. "So sorry," I said. "Had no idea." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Neither did I. I thought he'd told you." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Jack," I said, not looking at him. "I think you need to have a conversation with your son and his mother. I need some time to think." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked back into the venue, my wedding dress trailing behind me like a broken promise. Sarah found me in the bridal suite, curled up on the couch. One look at my face told her everything she needed to know. "Oh, Emily," she said softly, sitting beside me. "What happened?" I looked up at her, tears streaming down my face. "He lied about everything." Sarah's arm wrapped around my shoulders as I recounted the devastating series of events. Her expression shifted from shock to anger, then to deep concern. "That lying no good," she muttered, trailing off as she saw fresh tears well up in my eyes. "What do you want to do, Em?" I shook my head, feeling lost. "I don't know. How am I supposed to face everyone out there, our families, our friends, our colleagues? They're all expecting a happy bride and groom." Sarah squeezed my hand. "You don't owe anyone anything right now. Your feelings are what matter most." A soft knock on the door interrupted us. Jack's voice came through, pleading, "Emily, please, can we talk?" I looked at Sarah, panic rising in my chest. She stood up, a determined look on her face. "I'll handle this," she said, moving towards the door. I heard her step into the hallway, closing the door behind her. Their voices were muffled, but I could hear the anger in Sarah's tone and the desperation in Jack's. After a few minutes, Sarah came back in. Her face flushed. "He's gone," she said. "I told him to give you space." Relief washed over me, quickly followed by a wave of sadness. This should have been the happiest day of my life. Instead, it had turned into a nightmare. "What did he say?" I asked, not sure if I really wanted to know. Sarah sat back down beside me. "He wants to explain, says there's more to the story." She paused, studying my face. "Do you want to hear it?" I closed my eyes, trying to sort through the jumble of emotions inside me. Part of me wanted to run as far away as possible, to forget this day ever happened. But another part, the part that had loved Jack for 5 years, needed answers. "I think I have to," I said, finally opening my eyes. "But not now." "Not today," Sarah nodded. "So what's the plan?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I need to face our guests. They deserve an explanation, even if I can't give them the whole truth. "Are you sure?" Sarah asked, concern etched on her face. "We could just tell everyone you're sick." I shook my head. "No more lies. I've had enough of those for a lifetime with Sarah's help." I fixed my makeup and straightened my dress. As we walked towards the reception hall, I felt like I was marching to my own execution, but I held my head high, channeling every ounce of strength I had. The music died down as I entered, and all eyes turned to me. I saw confusion on their faces, quickly turning to concern as they noticed Jack's absence and my red-rimmed eyes. I made my way to the center of the room, my heart pounding. "Everyone," I began, my voice shaky, but gaining strength as I continued. "I want to thank you all for being here today. Your love and support mean the world to me. However, I'm afraid I have some difficult news." A murmur ran through the crowd. I saw my parents exchange worried glances and Jack's mother stepped forward, her face pale due to unforeseen circumstances. I continued, choosing my words carefully. "The wedding will not be taking place today. I'm so sorry for any inconvenience this may cause. Please enjoy the food and drinks. And thank you again for your understanding." The room erupted in whispers and exclamations. I felt hands on my shoulders and turned to see my parents, their faces a mix of shock and concern. "Emily, sweetheart, what happened?" my mother asked, pulling me into a hug. I leaned into her embrace, feeling like a little girl again. "It's complicated, Mom. I'll explain later. Promise. Right now I just need some air." My father nodded, his jaw set in a way that told me he was holding back his anger for my sake. "Of course, honey, we're here when you're ready." I made my way through the crowd, accepting hugs and words of sympathy from friends and family. By the time I reached the exit, I felt drained, as if I'd run a marathon. Outside, the cool evening air hit my face, and I took a deep breath. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the gardens. It would have been the perfect backdrop for wedding photos. The thought brought a fresh wave of pain. I wandered down a path, losing track of time as I tried to process everything that had happened. The sound of footsteps behind me made me turn. It was Jack's mother, Linda. "Emily," she said softly, her eyes filled with sadness. "May I join you?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. We walked in silence for a few moments before she spoke again. "I want you to know," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "that I had no idea about any of this. If I had known Jack was keeping such secrets from you, I would have urged him to be honest." I looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. "Thank you, Linda. Believe you." She reached out and took my hand. "Whatever Jack has done, please know that our family loves you. You've been like a daughter to us these past years." Tears welled up in my eyes again. "I love you all too. That's what makes this so hard." Linda squeezed my hand. "I understand if you need time and space, but please don't shut us out completely. Whatever happens between you and Jack, you'll always have a place in our hearts." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Linda gave me a gentle hug before heading back to the reception. As I watched her go, I realized I had a decision to make. Could I forgive Jack for his lies? Could we rebuild the trust that had been shattered? Or was it time to walk away from the life we'd planned together? The weight of these questions pressed down on me as I made my way back to the bridal suite. Sarah was waiting for me, a supportive smile on her face. "How are you holding up?" she asked as I sank onto the couch. "I feel like I'm in a bad dream," I admitted. "Keep hoping I'll wake up and none of this will have happened." Sarah sat beside me, taking my hand. "Well, I know it feels that way now, but you're strong, Em. You'll get through this, whatever you decide to do." I looked at her, grateful for her unwavering support. "What would you do?" I asked. She sighed, thinking for a moment. "Honestly, I'd hear him out. Not because he deserves it, but because you deserve answers. After that, well, that's something only you can decide." I nodded, knowing she was right. As much as it hurt, I needed to understand why Jack had lied, why he'd kept his son a secret all these years. "Will you help me get out of this dress?" asked Sarah. "I think it's time I faced Jack and got those answers." As Sarah helped me change into more comfortable clothes, I steeled myself for the conversation ahead. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. After today, nothing would ever be the same. I found Jack sitting alone in the garden, his head in his hands. As I approached, he looked up, his eyes red and puffy. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between us. "Emily," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't begin to cover it," but I held up a hand, cutting him off. "I didn't come here for apologies, Jack. I came for the truth, all of it. No more lies. No more half-truths. I need to know everything. He nodded, gesturing to the bench beside him. I sat down, making sure to leave space between us. Start from the beginning, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Jack took a deep breath. Started 6 years ago before we met. I was in a relationship with Melissa. That's Tommy's mother. We'd been together for about a year when she got pregnant. It wasn't planned and we were both scared. But we decided to try and make it work. He paused, running a hand through his hair. When Tommy was born, it was amazing, but it was also terrifying. I wasn't ready to be a father. Melissa and I were struggling, fighting all the time. When Tommy was about 6 months old, I left. I felt a surge of disappointment. You abandoned your child, Jack winced. I'm not proud of it. I told myself I was doing what was best for everyone. That Tommy deserved better than a father who resented being tied down. I sent money every month, but I stayed away. And then I prompted, trying to keep my emotions in check. And then I met you, he said, looking at me with a mix of love and regret. You were everything I'd ever wanted. Emily, smart, funny, ambitious, we clicked instantly. I knew I was falling for you, and I was terrified that if you found out about Tommy, you'd walk away. I shook my head, anger bubbling up. You didn't give me the chance to make that decision for myself, Jack. You took that choice away from me. He nodded, hanging his head. I know. It was selfish and cowardly. As time went on, it got harder and harder to tell you the truth. I convinced myself that the past was behind me, that I could have a fresh start with you. But it wasn't behind you, I said. You have a son, Jack, a living, breathing child who needs his father. Jack's face crumpled. I know about 2 years ago, Melissa contacted me. Tommy had been diagnosed with a rare genetic disorder. She needed me to get tested to see if I was a carrier. That's when I started seeing them again. My mind reeled. So when you told me earlier that Tommy had died, I panicked, Jack admitted, shame written across his face. I thought if I told you he had passed away, you'd forgive me for not mentioning him before. I didn't expect Melissa to show up here today. I stood up, needing to put some distance between us. Why did she come? Jack sighed. Tommy's treatment is expensive. The money I've been sending isn't enough anymore. She came to ask for help. I turned to face him, fury and disappointment warring inside me. So let me get this straight. You've been lying to me for our entire relationship. You abandoned your child, then lied about his existence, then lied about his death. And now, on our wedding day, the truth comes out because you need more money. Jack stood reaching out to me, but I stepped back. Emily, please. I know I've made terrible mistakes, but I love you. We can work through this. I laughed bitterly. Work through this. Jack, how can I ever trust you again? You've shown me that you're capable of lying about the most important things in life. How do I know you won't do it again? I won't, he insisted. I've learned my lesson. No more secrets, no more lies. I'll do whatever it takes to regain your trust. I shook my head, tears threatening to spill over. It's not that simple. You have a son who needs you, a son you've neglected for years. You can't just sweep that under the rug. Jack's shoulders slumped. I know I want to make things right with Tommy, but I don't want to lose you either, Emily. Please tell me there's still hope for us. I looked at him, the man I thought I knew so well, the man I'd been ready to spend my life with just hours ago. Now he felt like a stranger. I don't know, Jack, I said honestly. I need time to think, to process all of this, and you need to figure out how to be a father to your son. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. Understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk again. As I turned to leave, Jack called out, Emily, I truly am sorry for everything. I paused but didn't turn back. I know you are, Jack. But sometimes sorry isn't enough. I made my way back to the reception area where Sarah was waiting for me. One look at my face told her all she needed to know. Come on, she said gently. Let's get you out of here. As we drove away from the venue, I watched the place where I was supposed to start my new life fade into the distance. The future I had planned, the life I thought I knew, had crumbled in a matter of hours. Where to? Sarah asked, glancing at me. I thought for a moment. Can we go to your place? I don't think I can face going home right now, she nodded, squeezing my hand. Course you can stay as long as you need. As we drove through the city, my mind raced with questions. Could I forgive Jack? Did I even want to? And what about Tommy, the little boy I'd seen for just a moment, but who had changed everything? By the time we reached Sarah's apartment, I was exhausted. The emotional roller coaster of the day had drained every ounce of energy for me. Sarah helped me settle on her couch, bringing me a cup of tea and a blanket. Do you want to talk about it? She asked softly. I shook my head. Not yet. I just need to rest. She nodded understandingly. I'll be here when you're ready. As Sarah moved around the apartment, giving me space, I closed my eyes. The events of the day played on repeat in my mind. Jack's lies, the shock of seeing Tommy, the pain in Linda's eyes, the pity on our guests' faces. I thought about the life I'd imagined with Jack, our home, our careers, the family we'd talked about starting. It all seemed like a distant dream now, tainted by the reality of his deception. But as I drifted off to sleep, another image came to mind. A little boy with Jack's eyes, looking up at me in confusion. Tommy, an innocent child caught in the middle of this mess. Whatever happened between Jack and me, I knew one thing for certain. That little boy deserved better. I woke up the next morning feeling groggy and disoriented. For a blissful moment, I forgot everything that had happened. Then reality came crashing back, and I felt a fresh wave of pain wash over me. Sarah was already up, puttering around in the kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the air, and my stomach growled, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Morning, Sarah said softly as I stumbled into the kitchen. How are you feeling? I sank into a chair at the table like I've been hit by a truck. She placed a steaming mug of coffee in front of me. Understandable. Want some breakfast? I nodded gratefully, and Sarah busied herself making toast and eggs. As I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed. I'd turned it off yesterday after leaving the venue, not ready to face the barrage of messages I knew would be waiting. With a deep breath, I turned it on. As expected, there were dozens of missed calls and messages from my parents, Jack's family, our friends, even some colleagues who had been at the wedding. But the one that caught my eye was from an unknown number. I opened it, my heart racing. It was from Melissa, Tommy's mother. Emily, I'm so sorry for what happened yesterday. I had no idea Jack hadn't told you about Tommy. I never meant to cause such pain. If you're willing, I'd like to meet and talk. There's a lot you should know. I stared at the message, unsure how to feel. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend none of this was happening. But the part that couldn't stop thinking about that little boy knew I needed answers. Everything, Sarah asked, setting a plate of food in front of me. I showed her the message. What do you think I should do? Sarah read it. Her brow furrowed. That's entirely up to you, Em. But if it were me, I'd want to hear her side of the story. I nodded, knowing she was right. I think I need to meet her to understand everything. Want me to come with you? Sarah offered. I smiled gratefully. Thanks, but I think this is something I need to do alone. After breakfast, I replied to Melissa, agreeing to meet her at a cafe near Sarah's apartment as I got ready. I tried to prepare myself for what I might hear. But how do you prepare for a conversation that might change your entire perspective on the past 5 years of your life? The cafe was quiet when I arrived. I spotted Melissa immediately, sitting at a corner table with a cup of tea in front of her. She looked up as I approached, her face a mix of nervousness and regret. Emily, she said softly as I sat down. Thank you for coming. I nodded, not quite sure what to say. A waitress came over, and I ordered a coffee, needing something to do with my hands. I want to start by saying how sorry I am, Melissa began. I truly had no idea Jack hadn't told you about Tommy. If I had known, I never would have shown up like that. Why did you come? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Melissa sighed. Tommy's medical bills are piling up. The treatments he needs are expensive, and insurance only covers so much. I've been working 2 jobs, but it's not enough. I hope Jack would be willing to help more. I felt a pang of sympathy for her. Whatever Jack had done, it wasn't this woman's fault. Can you tell me about Tommy, about everything? She nodded, taking a sip of her tea before speaking. Jack and I met 6 years ago. We dated for about a year before I got pregnant. It wasn't planned, but we decided to try and make it work. When Tommy was born, things were good for a while, but Jack, he struggled with being a father. He started staying out late, coming home drunk. We fought a lot. My coffee arrived, and I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, bracing myself for what came next. When Tommy was 6 months old, Jack left. Melissa continued. He said he couldn't handle it, that he wasn't cut out to be a dad. He promised to send money every month, and he did. But he didn't want to see Tommy. I closed my eyes, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. And then for the next 3 years, we didn't hear from him except for the monthly checks. Then, when Tommy was about 4, he started getting sick a lot. After a bunch of tests, we found out he has a rare genetic disorder. The doctors needed to test Jack to see if he was a carrier. I nodded, remembering what Jack had told me. And that's when he started seeing Tommy again. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. Yes, at first it was just for the medical stuff, but then I think seeing Tommy, realizing how much he'd missed, it changed something in Jack. He started visiting more often, bringing gifts. Tommy adores him. My heart clenched at the thought of that little boy, so eager for his father's love. Does Tommy know about me? About the wedding? Melissa shook her head. Well, Jack told me he was seeing someone seriously, but he asked me not to tell Tommy. He said he wanted to figure out how to introduce you properly. I laughed bitterly. Well, that didn't quite work out as planned. Melissa reached out, hesitating before placing her hand on mine. Emily, I can't imagine how hurt and betrayed you must feel. But I want you to know that Tommy is a wonderful little boy. He's kind and smart and so loving. Whatever happens between you and Jack, I hope you can find it in your heart not to hold this against Tommy. I looked at her, seeing the love and concern for her son in her eyes. I would never blame Tommy for any of this. He's an innocent child caught in the middle of adult mistakes. She smiled gratefully. Thank you. That means a lot. We sat in silence for a moment, both lost in our thoughts. Finally, I asked the question that had been nagging at me. Melissa, why are you telling me all this? You could have just walked away after what happened at the wedding. She sighed. 'Cause I think you deserve to know the whole truth. And because, well, Tommy needs his father. I'm not saying you should forgive Jack or take him back. That's entirely your decision. But if there's any chance of salvaging something from this mess, I wanted you to have all the facts. I nodded, understanding her motivation. I appreciate your honesty. It's more than I've gotten from Jack in the past 5 years. As our meeting drew to a close, Melissa hesitated before speaking again. Emily, I know this is a lot to ask, but would you like to meet Tommy properly? Not in a parking lot during a wedding crisis. The question caught me off guard. Did I want to meet Tommy, the little boy who had unknowingly turned my life upside down? I thought about it for a moment, realizing that despite everything, I was curious about him. I think I would, I said finally. But I need some time first to process everything. Melissa nodded understandingly. Of course, whenever you're ready, just let me know. As we said goodbye, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger at Jack for his lies, sympathy for Melissa and the struggles she'd faced, and a growing curiosity about Tommy. Whatever happened next, I knew my life would never be the same. As I left the cafe, my mind was swirling with all the new information. I found myself walking aimlessly through the city, trying to make sense of everything. The bustling streets and noise provided a stark contrast to the turmoil in my head. I ended up in a small park, sitting on a bench overlooking a playground. Watching the children play, their laughter filling the air, I couldn't help but think of Tommy, a little boy I'd never met, yet who had become such a significant part of my life. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Jack again. I'd been ignoring his calls and messages, not ready to face him. But now, after talking to Melissa, I felt a shift in my emotions. The anger was still there, but it was tempered by a need to understand. Taking a deep breath, I answered the call. Emily. Jack's voice was a mix of relief and anxiety. Thank you for picking up. I've been so worried. I needed time to think, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. I met with Melissa today. There was a pause on the other end. Oh, I see. How did that go? She told me everything, Jack, about your relationship, about leaving when Tommy was a baby, about his illness. Why couldn't you have been honest with me from the start? I heard him sigh heavily. I was a coward, Emily. I was ashamed of how I'd acted, of abandoning my son. And then when I met you, I fell so hard. I was terrified of losing you if you knew the truth. But don't you see? By lying, you've put us in an even worse position. How can I trust anything you say now? I know, he said, his voice cracking. I know I've broken your trust, but Emily, I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. Please, can we meet? Talk face to face. I closed my eyes, considering part of me wanted to say no, to cut all ties and start fresh. But I knew I needed closure one way or another. Okay, I said, finally, let's meet. We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant where we'd had our first date. As I walked in, I saw Jack already seated at a table in the corner. He looked terrible, with dark circles under his eyes and his usually immaculate suit wrinkled. Emily, he said, standing as I approached. He moved as if to hug me, but I stepped back, not ready for that level of intimacy. Understanding flashed in his eyes, and he sat back down. We ordered drinks, more to have something to do than out of thirst. An awkward silence fell between us, so different from our usual easy conversation. I'm sorry, Jack said finally, breaking the silence. I know those words aren't enough, but I am truly deeply sorry for lying to you, for not trusting you with the truth from the beginning. I nodded, acknowledging his apology without accepting it just yet. Jack, why did you think you couldn't tell me about Tommy? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times before. First, it was because I was ashamed. I'd abandoned my child, Emily. What kind of man does that? I thought if you knew, you'd see me differently. And then, as time went on, it just got harder and harder to bring it up. I told myself that part of my life was over, that I could start fresh with you. But it wasn't over, I said softly. Tommy is still very much a part of your life. Jack nodded, his eyes filling with tears. I know, when Melissa called about his illness. It was like a wake-up call, seeing him again, realizing how much I'd missed. Killed me, Emily. I wanted to tell you then, but I was afraid. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of facing my past mistakes. I took a sip of my drink, processing his words. Jack, I need you to understand something. If you had told me about Tommy from the beginning, yes, I would have been shocked, but I would have understood. We could have worked through it together. But now I'm not just dealing with the fact that you have a child. I'm dealing with years of lies and deception. He reached across the table, hesitating before taking my hand. This time I didn't pull away. I know, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you if you'll let me. Emily, I love you. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Please tell me there's still hope for us. I looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there. But I also saw the man who had lied to me for years, who had hidden such a huge part of his life. I don't know, Jack, I said honestly. I love you too. But love isn't always enough. Trust is crucial. And right now I don't know if I can trust you. He nodded, pain evident in his expression. Understand. What can I do? How can I regain your trust? I thought for a moment. I think I need to meet Tommy. Properly. And I need to see you with him. I need to understand this part of your life that you've kept hidden for so long. Surprise flashed across Jack's face, followed by hope. Really? You want to meet Tommy? He nodded. He's a part of your life, Jack. If there's any chance for us to move forward, I need to know all of you. No more secrets. No more hidden parts. Relief washed over Jack's features. Course. I'll arrange it with Melissa. Thank you, Emily, for giving me this chance. As we left the restaurant, I felt a mix of emotions, uncertainty about the future, lingering anger and hurt over the lies, but also a glimmer of hope. Meeting Tommy wasn't a guarantee that Jack and I would work things out, but it was a step towards understanding. A week later, I found myself standing outside a small house in the suburbs, my heart pounding. Jack stood beside me, looking equally nervous, ready. He asked softly. I took a deep breath and nodded, as I'll ever be. The door opened and Melissa greeted us with a warm smile. And there, peeking out from behind her legs, was Tommy. Hi there, I said, kneeling down to his level. I'm Emily. It's nice to meet you, Tommy. He looked at me shyly before his face broke into a wide grin. Hi, Emily. Do you want to see my dinosaurs? And just like that, the ice was broken. As I followed Tommy into the living room, watching Jack interact with his son, I felt a shift in my perspective. This wasn't just about Jack's lies or my broken trust. It was about a little boy who deserved love and stability. Over the next few hours, I watched Jack with Tommy. I saw the love in his eyes, the gentle way he spoke to his son, the pride when Tommy showed off his toys or drawings. It was a side of Jack I'd never seen before, and it both warmed my heart and broke it a little as we were leaving. Tommy gave me a big hug. Will you come back and play again? He asked hopefully. I looked at Jack, then back at Tommy. I'd like that very much, I said softly. Walking back to the car, Jack took my hand. Thank you for doing this, he said, for giving me us a chance. I squeezed his hand but didn't say anything. The truth was I still didn't know what the future held for us. The hurt and betrayal were still there, a wound that would take time to heal. But seeing Jack with Tommy had shown me a new side of the man I loved. As we drove away, I realized that this wasn't an ending, but a beginning of honesty, of facing hard truths, of building something new. Whether that something included Jack and me as a couple, or as co-parents to Tommy, or something else entirely remained to be seen. But for the first time since that fateful wedding day, I felt a sense of peace. Whatever happened next, I knew I had the strength to face it. And just maybe there was a chance for all of us to find happiness in this unexpected new chapter of our lives. And please subscribe to my channel.